Washington DC, at least amongst us, those who have little or no record of their presence even here in the United States. Luis Gutiérrez has been the champion of immigration reform, comprehensive reform, to rectify a human rights crisis in our country, and that's to give voice to the voiceless. So I thank you for being here, and being my friend. I also want to welcome my fellow New Yorker and my very, very good friend, Francisco Moya. Francisco Moya was the first Ecuadorian American ever elected to a state legislative body or a legislative body in the United States. And I'm so proud of the work that he's been engaged in the state legislature, particularly as it pertains to young people who have come to this country, brought to this country by their parents, the dreamers who have been denied the opportunity to have a secondary education and a college education because of their status. He's working tirelessly on behalf of his constituents in Corona and in parts of Jackson Heights, parts of Elmhurst, and he's a great constituent of mine. And on behalf of the Ecuadorian people, we have Dr. Esther Cuesta, the Ecuadorian Deputy Minister for Human Mobility, who has joined us as well. We're also joined by Ecuador's ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Francisco Borja Ceballos, Ceballos, and by the Consul General of Ecuador in the United States, Linda Machuca Moscoso. 2 months ago, Ecuador suffered a tremendous earthquake, an earthquake that killed nearly 700 people. Close to 17,000 people were injured or were missing, and tens of thousands have been left homeless by this natural disaster. It was the worst earthquake to hit Ecuador in nearly 7 decades. It left Ecuador with significant challenges, not least of which are the continued aftershocks that keep the area in a state of panic and make rebuilding that much more difficult. My district, the 14th Congressional District, is home to a strong and proud Ecuadorian community, a growing community. They are worried about their homeland, they are worried about their friends, they are worried about their family, they are worried about their loved ones. And they know that one of the ways they can help is by being able to stay in the U.S., away from the immediate challenges facing the public health, safety, and social service crisis that is taking place in Ecuador today. And they also help from the U.S. by continuing to contribute to reconstruction efforts. Temporary Protective Status, TPS, exists for just this purpose. It's why we have it in our law. And it has been used in similar situations to great relief, both for the community here in the United States, but maybe more importantly, for their homeland, so they can begin to rebuild and put their lives back together. After the earthquake, over 30 members of the House joined me in calling for TPS to be granted to Ecuador, and this call has resonated far and wide. Just this week, leaders of 50 wide-ranging organizations reiterated this call for TPS to be granted. And we will continue to call for this action that will so significantly help Ecuadorians in the United States, and by extension, it will help Ecuador rebuild. I am pleased to be joined today by several of the leaders in the fight, both here in Washington, D.C., and in my home state, as well as in Ecuador as well. Let me now turn the microphone over to my good friend, I mean this with all sincerity, one of my closest allies here in the House of Representatives, Luis Gutiérrez from Illinois.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much. First, I want to say to all of you, it's a pleasure to gather with all of you. Good to see you. Thank you. You're the first, not the last. Thank you. And I know that Joe Crowley will make sure that happens. Yes, that's right. In New York City, if nowhere else. He has incredible power and incredible influence, not only in our Democratic caucus here, but I know back in your state. He's very, very committed to immigration reform. And I know he has a very special place in his heart for the Ecuadorian. So I'm happy to join today Congressman Crowley and being So I'm not going to read this. My staff is saying, why don't you write stuff? The Congressman then doesn't say it. But I read it, so I'm going to follow the script. Look, here's where we're at. Congressman Crowley has laid out what TPS is about. But just so that we get clear, especially for members of the press, just how this works. I don't say this to the members of the press to belittle them or to say they don't know how this works. I really didn't know, Joe, how it worked in terms of all of the steps that it takes to finally get TPS. So, as someone who has learned recently. So I called Secretary Jay Johnson. First I called the White House. The White House says, the President doesn't make those decisions. It's the Secretary of Homeland Security. Went back, checked the legislation just in case they were pulling it. And it's true. It's the Secretary of Homeland Security. So I called Secretary Johnson. He said, it's not in my inbox. I said, well, what does it take to get it in your inbox? He says, well, first the Secretary of State has to make a recommendation. So I called the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State said, first, the government of Ecuador has to transmit and make a request. We made the request from the government of Ecuador. I said, that's done. So I called back, what's next? The embassy, American embassy, has to make an evaluation. I just want to let everybody know, the evaluation has been done by the American embassy. It has been evaluated by the Division on Western Hemisphere, and it's on the desk of the Secretary Kerry today. So he has it on his desk. I don't know how long it's going to take it to get off his desk, but Joe, I think you and I are going to do a little phone call to Secretary Johnson on Monday together,
yes,
right? And we're going to call the Secretary on Monday together, right? New York and Illinois, two communities that have, two cities that have really great Ecuadorian communities. We're going to call them because I believe that by Monday, Secretary Kerry's recommendation or recommendations evaluates more an evaluation than a recommendation. They put the pros and the cons of TPS. That's in his hands. He'll be transmitting that to the Secretary of Homeland Security. And then I can go all the way back to the very beginning, which is sometimes what you do in Washington, DC. You start someplace only to wind up where you originally began. And then we can't get an answer. Here's my hope, that on Tuesday, Congressman Crowley and I can have a conversation with Secretary Jay Johnson, and we can get him, right, to approve temporary protective status for the Ecuadorian community. It is what is right. It is what is necessary. It's what's just. And I can't see why we wouldn't do it. It is temporary protective status. So for the tens of thousands of Ecuadorians should not be forced back to Ecuador because their visas expire. Because they get caught up in our immigration system at this particular moment. The resources of the Ecuadorian community should be focused. The government in Ecuador should be focused on the Ecuadorian nationals in Ecuador. In the interim period, we will give a safe harbor and a place of protection for the Ecuadorians that are here until such time they can return. I'm not suggesting they need to. Anybody that knows me philosophically knows that I'd never say anything like that. My point is, we need to keep them in a protective status today. So, brevemente, en español, empecé llamando al presidente, me mandó al secretario de Homeland Security, hablé con él, me dijo que John Kerry primero tenía que hacer la recomendación, llamé a John Kerry, me dijo que su embajada tenía que hacer la evaluación, el gobierno de Ecuador tenía que hacer la petición. Estamos de nuevo. Congresista Crowley, Congresista Gutiérrez, el lunes se comprometen con ustedes. So Monday we're committing to you. We're going to get on the phone. We can probably arrange ahead of time so we can have a certain time to talk to Secretary Johnson, and we'll talk to him. He already knows what we're going to call him about because we called him about 5 weeks ago. So he knows where we're at. And then we're going to make sure that everybody can sign up. That's my hope. Am I positive? Yes. Am I optimistic? Yes. Am I certain? No. But we're going to do everything we can. And I just didn't want you to think that a couple of congressmen signed the letter, had a press conference, and went home. No, we signed the letter, we organized, and we're going to continue to do what? What we're supposed to do, which is advocate, 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 until we get the right answer. And the answer in this case is yes to TPS. I just want to say once again, quiero asegurar que la comunidad ecuatoriana entienda algo. Ustedes tienen un individuo de influencia, de poder, y más importante, sabe utilizar su poder y su influencia con tenacidad en el congresista Joe Crowley. Nosotros vamos a ser exitosos. Gracias. Yo quiero él también. Es grande, ¿verdad? Los irlandeses son grandes.
Let me thank, as I mentioned, my very good friend Luis